Tonight on the Donlon Report, as we await word from the Rittenhouse jury, focus now shifts to the Ahmaud Arbery murder case. Tensions are high in Georgia. We're live in both cities for you. Plus, we're going to speak with the man credited for calming down the riots in Ferguson, Missouri 7 years ago. How do police stop them from even happening? Can they? We'll ask. And the Oklahoma National Guard is pretty much rebelling over the vaccine mandate, and the state's governor is supporting them. Congressman Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma is here, and he'll join us live on that and more. Great to have you with us live from our NewsNation studios in Chicago, Illinois. The Donlon Report starts right now. Good evening. Two high-profile court cases playing out on national television, one of them finally getting the attention it deserves. That is the pulse of America. As we await a verdict in the Rittenhouse trial, the defense has now rested in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. Arbery was shot and killed after a confrontation with two men who followed Arbery as he jogged through a neighborhood. 3 men are charged in this case. They claim they were trying to make a citizen's arrest after a series of break-ins in the area. It seems every time there was a major development in this case, something else overshadowed it. The pandemic hit a month after the shooting. Then video of the shooting emerged in May of 2020, which prompted protests. But shortly after that, the murder of George Floyd became the national story. Fast forward to this week, the start of the trial, and even the defendant taking the stand. Most of the national focus has been on Kenosha, where the Rittenhouse trial was already underway. Even from the vantage point of our own reporters on the ground, the crowds outside the courthouses at both locations are very different. In Kenosha, we're told the media outnumbers the protesters. Certainly not the case in Brunswick, Georgia. That's where the real tension is. Take a look at this, though. Meantime, back in Kenosha, video of protesters there supporting Rittenhouse and Black Lives Matter sharing a pizza together. Images that were celebrated online for cutting through the divisions. This was certainly great video to see, and it caught up a lot of people's attention. Here's the reality, though. We asked one of them to join us tonight, and he said he was afraid for his safety and declined to join us. For what it's worth, more images from Kenosha. The sheriff there bringing coffee and cookies to the crowd today. He says he doesn't expect any problems. Let's certainly hope that's the case. Meantime, let's take you now to both locations. Janel Forte standing by in Brunswick for us. But first, Brian Entin is in Kenosha. Brian?
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned it. The media definitely outnumbers the protesters out here. Let me show you. This is the Kenosha County Courthouse right here. You can see there's maybe a dozen or so protesters still out here. It's chilly out here. Most have gone home. But even at the height today, I would say there were maybe 30, 40, 50 at most protesters out here today. So it's been a light crowd. Media, on the other hand, I want to show you this, Joe. You can see everybody here set up doing their live shots. It goes all the way down the block. And then on the other side of the street, there's probably a dozen network tents or so. And you've got easily 100, 150 different members of the media out here. So a lot of reporters covering this trial. You mentioned the sheriff earlier. This was kind of a nice moment. Kenosha County Sheriff came out here outside the courthouse, brought a ton of cookies and donuts, said he wanted to talk with the protesters, sort of try to keep everyone calm, and told us so far they don't see any signs that things are going to heat up out here. Listen to what the sheriff told us.
Do you have any reason to feel that this could escalate here, sir?
Anything can escalate. You can have a husband and wife getting into a fight and having something escalate. Could this escalate? Yeah, but so we're trying to de-escalate right now of anything that's going on.
Have you heard of any specific threats or any reason to be specifically concerned?
No.
And so the jury stopped deliberating for the day about 30 minutes out here. So tomorrow they will go into day 4 of deliberations. Joe?
Yeah, Brian, a lot of people were expecting a verdict today, but we will wait and continue. Let's get the latest on what happened with the judge today banning a reporter from the courtroom. Give us more and the latest on that.
Yeah, this was interesting, Joe. And he didn't just ban a reporter. He banned an entire network. He said NBC and NBC are no longer allowed inside the courtroom or the courthouse. Basically, this is because he says police are investigating after an MSNBC freelance producer is accused of following the jury van after the van left the courthouse. There were some reports that that producer may have been trying to take pictures of the jurors. NBC News responded, said the producer was not trying to take pictures. All of this right now under investigation. But bottom line, judge says NBC no longer allowed inside the courthouse.
All right, Brian, thanks for the update live for us tonight in Kenosha. Now we move on to the other big story we talked about coming out of the courtroom this week. NewsNation's Janel Forte live for us in Brunswick, Georgia, covering the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial and the big crowds that have gathered there. Hi, Janel.
Hey, Joe. Well, the defense just rested its case after 2 days of witness testimony. Their big witness was Travis McMichael, the man seen in that now viral video shooting and killing Ahmaud Arbery. And the big part of his testimony today was that he, in cross-examination, told the prosecutor that Arbery didn't threaten him, he didn't show a weapon or anything prior to him pulling out a gun and pointing it at the 25-year-old black jogger. Now, as you just mentioned, you know, what was going on in the court largely overshadowed what was going on outside. Hundreds of black pastors showing up here to Brunswick in a direct response to comments made by one of the defense attorneys last week. The defense attorney for William Roddy Bryan, Kevin Goss, said last week that they didn't need any more black pastors in the courtroom. That was because Reverend Al Sharpton was here sitting with the Ahmaud Arbery family. In response to that, Al Sharpton made a rallying call for black pastors to come here to Brunswick. They showed up today. There were a lot of big name people here, including civil rights activists, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, of course, Martin Luther King III, as well as Ben Crump and Lee Merritt. All of them here. They held a big press conference during the lunch break today, also triggering more issues inside the courtroom. This time, that same defense attorney hinting at a request for another mistrial, this time saying that they could hear what was going on outside. They could hear the chants from those pastors inside the courtroom, and it could influence and intimidate the jury, Joe.
All right, it continues tomorrow, but as you mentioned, the defense rested today. Janel Forte, thanks for the update live for us tonight in Georgia. The prosecution opened today with a tense cross-examination of the man who shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia last February. Arbery's mother says the defendant, Travis McMichael, had no proof her son was involved in those break-ins and killed her son based on assumptions. McMichael was pressed today on his claim that Arbery posed a threat to him.
Didn't threaten you in any way?
No.
Didn't verbally threaten you?
Not
like
verbally.
Yell at you?
Not verbally, no.
Didn't pull out a gun?
He did not pull out a gun.
The jury was dismissed for the weekend, as we mentioned just a short time ago. Joining me now to talk more about this, criminal defense attorney Trent Copeland. Trent, it's great to have you back. Let's start with this call for a mistrial on what's happening outside the courtroom. This will be a topic tomorrow, even though court is off. What do you make of this?
I don't make much of it, Joe. You know, look, this is a high-profile case. This case could have been moved anywhere. Remember, the defense had the opportunity to request a change of venue in this case. They didn't avail themselves of that. You know, this case, high-profile case, is a case that could have been brought anywhere. And look, these ministers, these pastors from all over the country have flown there. And so they either could have flown to Brunswick, Georgia, they could have flown to New Zealand for all that matters. I don't think the defense is really going to have a tenable basis to claim that this is somehow prejudicing what's happening inside the courtroom as a result of what's happening outside of that courtroom.
Right. Last time you and I talked about some of the criticism of the prosecution in the Rittenhouse case. The prosecutors are getting high marks in this case, and we're going to play just a little bit of it for our audience, and we'll ask you on the other side.
Could have just continued to drive behind Mr. Arbery and not even speak to him or confront him at all. And you could have stayed in your truck until he ran by and then driven away to go ahead and follow him, right?
I could have, yes.
So, Trent, to this point, it seems like the prosecutor just went step by step, statement by statement, and poked holes in pretty much everything the defense was trying to put on here.
She did, and she did a masterful job, Joe. She was strategic, she was calculating, she took this defendant through each opportunity that he had to pull back, each opportunity that he would have had to say, whoa, you know what? I'm going to allow law enforcement to handle this. I'm not going to take this matter into my own hands. And she went through step by step each opportunity when Ahmaud Arbery did not present a risk to this defendant. He didn't yell at him. He didn't threaten him. He didn't advance towards him. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't use any menacing words or language towards his defendant. So look, I think she did a masterful job. And look, and I want to say this, Joe, as well. I don't think that the prosecution in the Rittenhouse case did a horrible job. I just think it took them a while to build up to this case. This prosecutor in this case has started out extraordinarily well and has remained that way. So I expect that this case will ultimately end in a guilty verdict, frankly, but it remains to be seen.
Trent, the Rittenhouse trial hinged on self-defense. What does this case hinge on, in your opinion?
I think it's the same thing, Joe. You nailed it. I think it's self-defense here. And look, this raises that very broad question of whether or not you can take the law into your own hands, and when something goes horribly wrong and someone is killed, can you avail yourself of the principle of self-defense as a result of provoking the situation? And so, look, what we're having here is this broader discussion about self-vigilantism. And so whether it's stand your ground, frankly, with the Trayvon Martin case, and whether it's self-defense with respect to the Rittenhouse case and now this case with Ahmaud Arbery, we're having to ask ourselves the broader question of, if you are armed, are we tacitly saying, yeah, you've got a gun, you've got a weapon, you can also use it? The problem I find with gun owners principally, particularly those who find themselves in the crosshairs of the law, it is the misunderstanding that you can own a gun and you can carry that gun, but you cannot point that gun. And the moment you point that gun, that person who you pointed that gun at has a right to self-defend. That person has the right to repel that resistance, whether you fired a bullet or not.
Attorney Trent Copeland, it's been great having your voice over the last week or so, and I'm sure we'll be counting on you in the next days as we expect verdicts in one and probably even both of these, maybe even by Thanksgiving. We'll see. Trent, thanks for the time.
You bet.
We do have some breaking news now. The Congressional Budget Office just released its score on the Build Back Better plan. NewsNation's Evan Lambert joins us now with that score and more. Evan?
Yeah, Joe, so this really coming out within the last 20 minutes or so. The Congressional Budget Office saying that the Build Back Better bill, this $1.75 trillion bill, would add $367 billion to the deficit. That is over the 10-year period. Now, the White House and the Treasury Department say that through better tax enforcement, that would raise $400 billion, so that would more than cover that. The question is whether that will be enough for the House moderates that were awaiting this score from the Congressional Budget Office all day today, and whether or not they will trust that to vote with the rest of the Democratic caucus and pass this bill and really essentially trust the White House here. But that is just developing over the last few minutes here, that estimate out from the Congressional Budget Office. Joe?
Right, Evan, and I know that vote could possibly come tonight in the House, and you'll have the latest covered for us right here on NewsNation. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate the update. So, did you hear about the standoff between the Oklahoma National Guard and the Pentagon over vaccine mandates? The state says no shot needed. The Pentagon says failure to do so could, quote, jeopardize the status of the troops. We have that story and more ahead. And to all our viewers out there, we want to thank you for making NewsNation the fastest growing cable news network in the country. Appreciate you watching. Back with more after this.
There was a lack of law enforcement, lack of National Guard on the ground. And like I said before, it did feel like you were in the war zone. I do believe that the Rittenhouse shooting could have been completely avoided if law enforcement came in and actually stopped the riot. So let me remind the audience that the Rittenhouse shooting happened on the third night of riot. So this could have been stopped on the first night. This could have been stopped on the second.
That was reporter Jorge Ventura on our broadcast last night, noting the incident where Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 protesters, injured another on the third night of unrest in Kenosha last summer. He argues police could have done something to stop the unrest before it came to that. But we have certainly seen the video from that night and other protests that occurred across the country. And as you look at this, you might wonder, is that easier said than done? Well, joining me now to help break this down is someone with a lot of experience of his own trying to quell similar protests, retired Missouri State Highway Patrol Captain Ron Johnson. Captain, as we talked about this today in our meeting, your name came up and we thought you'd be perfect to address this. So we want to start, and we appreciate your time, first of all, with that answer in Kenosha. What would you say? People who saw this, I'm sure were wondering, where are the police? How would you answer that?
Well, protests are challenging. Our citizens have a right to protest, a right to voice their opinion. So they are challenging. But for police, we have to make sure that we kind of embed ourselves along the protest routes so we can see what's going on and not be on one end of the street and the protesters on the other end. So it's important to plan. For a lot of cities, it's something new, and so there are a lot of challenges. But I think police do their best to get out there and try to identify those that are interrupters.
Protests are one thing, Captain. What we saw in Kenosha and what you saw in Ferguson as you ran the police response there, those were completely different. When you see scenes and images like you dealt with in Ferguson and like this, what are police supposed to do when you have people running through the streets with ARs and you have people burning down businesses?
And so we separated between protesters and rioters. And those rioters, we have to make sure we bring them to justice, and we use the laws that we have to enforce them. And so we try to stop their behavior, but we have to separate them. And you're right, those that are being destructive are I call them rioters, and they're there for no other purpose.
Well, the problem with this is, Captain, as you well know, I mean, if you have a situation like this, we've described it as sort of street warfare. And the minute you insert officers into that situation, who are more than likely heavily armed, it either escalates it, things get very tense, and it puts the police and everyone in a very dangerous situation. How do you make that decision when to send people in?
Well, one thing we did in Ferguson, we asked those protesters to go home at a certain time. We gave them a period where we wanted them to be out and have their freedoms so we could separate and identify those people that were there to destroy our city. And we were able to do that toward the end. It took us some time to get there, but we got there. And so by building the trust between the protesters that are there, knowing that we're there to protect them, and separating them and taking action, swift action, against those that are destroying our cities.
Yeah, well, the Rittenhouse shooting happened during a curfew. I don't know how many of the protesters abide by that. But, Captain, let's listen to something that Robbie Suave from Reason Magazine told us on our broadcast earlier this week.
People have the right to protest the decision if they don't like it. That's protected First Amendment activity. They don't have the right to set things on fire and smash windows and engage in violence, and it's the responsibility of the police to stop that. If the police had done a better job with this in the first place, we wouldn't have even been in this situation.
That sort of echoes a little bit of the first topic coming in, Captain, but I would just wonder, like the protests that we've seen, say, in Portland, Oregon, where a lot of protesters on both sides show up and they're not happy until the flashbangs are flying and this thing's out of control. How do police address that?
Well, I think police address that by bringing those to justice, making sure there's rules in place to address those issues, and those that are arrested, that we make sure they're charged and they go through our court system. And so we have to continue to do that. We have to continue to plan. We have to continue to learn from each protest that happens in our country. But the gentleman's absolutely right. Rioters have no rights to tear up our city, and police have to take a stand, an immediate stand.
Well, as you say that, Captain, as I recall, this video you're looking at is from Portland. And I think at that point, the police in Portland had decided to take a hands-off approach to this thing and say, look, you guys are on your own. They were off at a distance around the perimeter. You tried the hands-off approach in Ferguson, and then things took a turn for the worse. But I know in your book you've written about how that first night you took your vest off and got in with the protesters, and you even took some heat from your own officers on how you approached this.
You do. Everybody has their opinion, but you do have to get in there. You have to be engaged with the protesters and get their point of view and their respect. And I think when you can do that, that assists you in dealing with the rioters. It's a great tool when you have that relationship. And later into the protest, the protesters were helping us control and bring and identify those people that were destroying our city in the town of Ferguson.
You've heard the criticism, Captain, I'm sure, that the police are over-militarized and you show up with, heavy equipment. And I guess my question is, do you worry that in some of these protests, which are aimed at police, by the way, that just, again, escalates the tensions between the groups?
I think it can. I think if the people that are out there protesting to create change and standing up for their own rights, if we're using that against them, then it does become negative. But I can tell you that those people that were out there that were strictly protesters and standing up for their rights and looking for change wanted us to take action against the rioters because they were taking away the importance of the movement they were trying to achieve.
All right, Captain Ronald Johnson, thank you so much for your time. I know the book is called 13 Days in Ferguson, my hometown, by the way. I appreciate what you did during that time 7 years ago, and I appreciate you joining us to talk about it tonight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oklahoma's governor says its National Guard does not need to get vaccine shots, but the Pentagon says not so fast. How will this standoff play out? And as drug overdose deaths hit a record 100,000 over the past year, how much is illegal fentanyl brought over the border contributing to that? I'll ask the Vice President of the National Border Council next. An unfortunate marker over the past year, 100,000 Americans died of a drug overdose in 12 months during the pandemic between April of 2020 and April of this year. The number one culprit, fentanyl. There were more deaths from that illegal opioid alone than there were overdose deaths from all drugs in 2016. Joining me now for more on this, Rio Grande Valley National Border Patrol Council Vice President Chris Cabrera. Always good to have you, Chris. I guess overall, there's been a decrease in the drugs coming over, but fentanyl is up and way up, and it seems to be driving a lot of these deaths and the problems.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got no audio. I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Let's hope we can maybe get that figured out. Can you hear me now? 1, 2. I guess you can't. All right. Well, we will get back to Chris here in a minute when we get the audio situation figured out. In the meantime, we want to go to NewsNation's Marky Martin. She is live for us tonight on another big story we're following today, where the governor of Oklahoma has commuted the death sentence of death row inmate Julius Jones. And Marky joins us right now with the latest on what was a big day. Marky?
Hey, Joe. Yeah, my crew was inside this Capitol Rotunda, and I'll tell you what, that reaction was explosive. I'll venture to say there were probably between 200 and 300 people inside, chanting, screaming, jumping up and down, crying even. They could not believe that the life of Julius Jones had just been spared. Now, of course, at the end of the day, the person who had the final call here as to whether or not that execution was followed through with was Governor Kevin Stitt. And at 12:08 this afternoon, the governor sent out an emailed announcement saying that he had made his decision, he'd made his choice, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, Joe, I'll tell you what, I'm from Oklahoma. I can tell you the entire state was watching this today. This is a headline that's been on the forefront of Oklahoma headlines and criminal justice stories for years at this point. And here's a snippet of some of our conversations today in the immediate aftermath, including from Julius Jones' sister, Antoinette.
What are you feeling right now?
Peaceful. Just been thanking God continuously without ceasing. This is all due to God. Yes, it is. God said he shall live and not die.
Zoom.
Now, Jones was convicted in the 1999 shooting death of Paul Howe. Paul was an Oklahoma businessman here. He was killed in his driveway in front of his 2 young daughters after they had returned home from an ice cream date and back to school shopping. And Joe, not the result, not the announcement that the Howe family wanted to hear today. They do believe that Jones is the person who pulled the trigger.
Marky, quickly, I was trying to look it up here while you were doing your report there, but where did Oklahoma stand on the death penalty, and did I read right that they just reinstated it?
They just reinstated it. You know, there were a series of botched executions back in 2014, 2015. Inmates were having adverse reactions when they were going through the process. And so there was a moratorium placed on the practice just last month. That moratorium was lifted today. Had Julius Jones been executed, he would have been the second inmate to be put to death since that was lifted.
All right.
Joe.
That's great information. Thanks for the update. Marky Martin live for us tonight. Let's bring back in Rio Grande Valley National Border Patrol Council Vice President Chris Cabrera. Chris, we got the audio figured out. We were talking about how 100,000 people have died in the last year, most of that from overdoses from fentanyl. And I was asking you why it's such a problem at the border and what the Border Patrol is trying to do to address it.
Well, you know, you open the borders like they have, and this is what you can expect from it. We're getting inundated with people that are crossing, people turning themselves in, people running. All right, we don't have enough agents down there due to the overwhelming numbers that we're getting. So obviously the cartels are going to exploit that weakness and come in with drugs, and that's what they're doing. And we can expect to see this more often until they get a handle on the situation.
How much of this is up to Border Patrol, Chris? Do you get help from other agencies like DEA, or is this all up to you to catch coming across?
Well, you know, obviously that's not our primary mission, but it is something we probably see more than anybody else. Obviously, DEA and the state and local law enforcement work at it as well. It's just the overwhelming numbers that are coming across. It used to be that all we would really see on the border was you know, large shipments of marijuana, but now we're starting to see it all. We're starting to see cocaine, heroin, you name it. It's coming across that border because they know that's the weak spot because there's so much coming across right now.
The numbers are down a little bit, Chris. 164,000 encounters, as I understand. Some are questioning whether that's being undercounted, but let's just say it's close. It's down from where it was over the summer, which was over 200,000 encounters a month. Are you noticing a slowdown? Is this seasonal?
Well, you know, I believe last month it had slowed down. It was noticeable in the field. However, we have seen an uptick, and it's kind of odd that we're talking about that. You know, 100,000 is a slowdown when this time last year we were probably at 30,000, somewhere in that range. So it did drop for a little bit for a month, but it looks like we're on track this month to set another record.
All right, Chris Cabrera, thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it. Sorry about the audio problems.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Let's get back now to that news from Oklahoma today. Representative Markwayne Mullin, Republican of Oklahoma, joins us right now. Congressman, I appreciate the time. I know you have a lot going on. Let's start with this decision to commute the death sentence today for Julius Jones.
Right.
The governor made that decision. You agree with that?
You know, I haven't looked into the case at all, and I support the governor. You know, the governor has to make a tough decision there, and so it's hard for me to really comment too much on it. But I know the governor. I know he put a lot of prayer, he put a lot of thought into it, and he got wise counsel on it. So I support his decision.
Let me ask you out a bigger picture question then, Congressman. At least 22 states, and I think maybe even more under a governor's hold, have abolished the death penalty. I know you just resumed it there in Oklahoma. Do you think it's time to do away with this?
No, absolutely not. I think that's a decision that the juries can make, and you know, there's a certain price you have to pay when you commit a crime. And if his peers that are on the jury box decides to put him to death, I think that they have the right to do that. So I don't believe in abolishing the death penalty at all.
All right, I want to get you on mandates in a minute, but let's get to pressing business here. Are you going to vote on the Build Back Better plan tonight? You heard the numbers from the CBO. We just reported it. I guess $367 billion added to the deficit over 10 years. Again, will you vote on it tonight, and will you be a hard no?
I'm absolutely a hard no, and yes, we'll be voting on it late tonight. You know, this is typical Pelosi style. We saw this in 2010, actually, you know, about a month from now, when she jammed everybody with Obamacare and actually told the congressional individuals that were here at the time and the American people, if you want to know what's in it, read it or pass it, then you can read it. Well, this is the same thing, except this is bankrupting the country. If you think about the $1.75 trillion bill that they're passing tonight, that they literally just released the full text recently on, and then we just got the CBO score. We're going immediately into vote. We actually debated the rule and debated the bill before it was even out. How do you even do that? I don't know. Only Pelosi's math works that way. And here she moves forward and is going to do $1.75 trillion on top of her $1.3 trillion that they passed on the infrastructure. This is just a huge move to take over our country with socialist agendas, and it should scare the daylights out of everybody. I've literally have been saying this for a long time, that Pelosi's a tyrant, and she is truly a tyrant that's moving this country towards a socialist country.
All right, let's get you. We're running out of time here, Congressman. On the governor in your state's decision not to mandate the COVID vaccine for National Guard troops, where does this come between federal and state control? Is this up to the governor, and should it be?
Absolutely. Underneath Title 32, it's clear that the chain of command rests solely with the governor of the state. They don't go underneath DOD. I don't care what Secretary Austin says or not. That Secretary Austin came out and said that DOD, the Pentagon, has authority over National Guard. That is absolutely not true. They only have the authority when the National Guard gets activated and they go underneath Title 10. Underneath Title 32, the governor absolutely has the right to do that, and he has made the right decision. Getting the vaccine is a personal choice. It's the choice of the individual, and if they choose to get it, they can get it. If they choose not to, that is their choice.
Well, I know other states have called asking how your governor did it, so we'll see where it goes from here. One other thing I wanted to get you on, Congressman, your trip to Afghanistan. I know it's been a little while, but you went over there to try to rescue some folks and bring them out of Afghanistan. You got stopped with a bag of cash. Money talks. I mean, looking back on this now, I know you don't have any regrets, but would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, no, listen, that story that they put out is absolutely false. To operate in that country underneath Sharia law, to which President Biden surrendered Afghanistan to, that's their currency. They don't have credit cards. You can't operate anyway but with cash. And the only regret is we didn't go in there sooner, because we still have Americans left. We still have LPRs, which are legal permanent residents, left. We are currently holding roughly 124. We're trying to get help. Secretary Blinken's not being helpful at all. Director Burns for the CIA is not being helpful at all. And we are still over there working, and a lot of other groups are over there working. We have been successful. We've got a lot of AMSETs and LPRs out, but there's a lot more to be done. And I promise you, every American over there would love to be home for the holidays, but they were abandoned, literally abandoned by the State Department and President Biden.
Well, we're talking to groups as well that are still trying to get the Afghan allies out. It's great to have you, Congressman Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma. I know, again, you have a busy night ahead. Thanks for the time.
Yes. Hey, thank you for having me on.
You bet. After calls to defund the police swept the country last year, one Seattle suburb looking now to refund the police. I'm going to speak with the councilman about that initiative next. And Vice President Kamala Harris looking for a new communications director. Are cracks forming within the administration? NewsNation's Leland Bittert joins us on that. Ahead. From defund to refund. The Justice Department announcing $139 million to police departments nationwide to add 1,000 new officers. This, as a Seattle area leader, is now pushing legislation to, as he calls it, refund the cops. King County Vice Chair Reagan Dunn joins us now. He's behind that push. Councilman, let's start, I guess, with this question. The Seattle City Council, as I understand it and read today, is voting on whether to restore $10 million in cuts. Others, I guess, want to still cut more. Where does that stand right now?
$11 million in cuts is what's being championed right now at the Seattle City Council. And unfortunately, it forces the other jurisdictions, including the county, which is Seattle plus 38 other cities, to increase funding because there's been over 300 police officers cut from the Seattle Police Department. The county's cut up to 40% of its force as well. So we've got to get back to refunding our police to keep our community safe.
You touched on it there. You said that the suburbs are paying the price. What do you mean and how?
Violent crime, gun-related crime is way up. Homicides will have doubled by 100% since 2018. And what's happening is the suburbs are basically being required to add, maintain, enhance their police forces because the crime is spreading out to the suburbs from Seattle that is so crime-ridden right now.
Yeah, we found today, one number anyway, shootings and shots fired calls in Seattle up 38%. So you're saying, despite the momentum in recent years to defund, it's time to refund, and you have, I guess I just now started to push this new referendum. What does it aim to do?
Well, you know, I'm beating the drum, this anthem of refunding the police. What it's going to do is it's going to restore a significant portion of the sheriff's deputies that were lost. It's going to create a bunch of specialized units that got cut, like our gang unit, which got cut. It's going to add a hate crimes unit. It's going to add a bunch of equipment and training, as well as funding more prosecutors. And so it's designed to bring back the base community safety funding to levels that are sustainable and can keep crime down.
So the last I heard, Seattle was down something like 300 officers. How do you find the officers to fill these positions you want?
Well, the city of Seattle needs to figure it out. It's making the entire rest of the greater Seattle area much less safe. So King County, which is a more moderate group of elected officials, I'd like to think anyway, is in the process, I think, of following my lead and adding more funding. We're going to have to strengthen the suburban crescent around Seattle. And then things like what happened here 2 weeks ago, where for the first time in many generations, a Republican was elected Seattle City Attorney, which is the prosecutor for that jurisdiction. It's unconscionable 2 or 3 years ago, but voters have had it. And I think the Seattle Seattle City Council that continues to defund, pushing another $11 million in cuts, are going to have very, very tough elections in the next year or two.
If it seems to me that voters have been pretty clear on this, as you mentioned, that they voted in a pro-police mayor as well. So I guess my question is, despite what's happening in the council right now, is there a way to meet somewhere in the middle here? Consider perhaps some of the reforms that people seem to want while providing the police protection that people also definitely want.
Yeah, I think if you're in good government and you care about it, you realize you can fully fund our law enforcement at the same time you are doing things like holding police accountable and improving accountability measures inside the department. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And so I hope that people start to get the message, especially with the vote 2 weeks ago, that it's time to bring community safety measures back. We have long-standing generations of proven value in terms of having our police force and prosecution working hard to stop violent crimes. And so I hope we are in the process of rebuilding that infrastructure.
So take a peek into the crystal ball there, Reagan. What do you think happens with this situation that's before the council right now, and what's ahead for your ordinance?
I think that the Seattle City Council is in deep trouble. I think they're deeply out of touch. They're listening to folks that have grabbed hold of the microphone and are going in the wrong direction. I think the King County Council, a bigger jurisdiction, is more likely to find a moderate, common sense solution to this. And what we're going to see is we're going to see crime lower in those unincorporated areas, and crime will continue to be high in Seattle unless they begin to fix the critical defunding of the police.
All right. Well, it's something we'll continue to follow. We appreciate you joining us tonight to explain some of what's going on there in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. King County Vice Chair Reagan Dunn, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right, On Balance with Leland Vittert starts at the top of the hour. He joins us on set now, and let's start with what's happening with the vice president and her staff. This is, I mean, this is pretty much a given of what's happening. This is not good.
No. There's almost really no way to spin this, what's happening. So Kamala Harris is now the least popular vice president in U.S. history at 28%. No one's ever been that low. There was an article on CNN over the weekend that she's been sidelined and that her office is a toxic place to work. That comes after a June report where they said her office is a toxic place to work. And since then, you've seen this like hug fest, right, with her and Joe Biden. And then today now, one of her key aides, her communications director, is quitting to pursue other opportunities. Now, you listen to the administration, they're blaming everybody but Kamala Harris for this. But at some point, people are starting to say, and it's not just conservative media, maybe it's not us, it's her.
Well, at some point, to your point, this is a big position. A comms director doesn't just leave really in the middle of all of this, right, without a good reason. What do you think that reason might be?
Well, it's one of two things, right? Either she has had enough, and this Ashley Entin worked with Nancy Pelosi. So she says, look, I'm getting off the sinking ship. That's option number one. Option number two is that the Harris team has decided that the problem is their communication strategy, right?
Okay.
Well, thoughtful, okay, but Kamala Harris this morning gave the softest of softball interviews to George Stephanopoulos. And even then, just could not deliver on anything, couldn't break through this narrative that has been plaguing her. Over time, you have to wonder, is it the comm shop? Is it how she's being presented? Or is it the person that is being presented? That's awfully hard to change. It's a little bit, at some point, you can change coaches throughout a season as much as you want on a football team. But if you don't have the quarterback who can deliver on the plays, doesn't really matter.
What's ahead for you at the top of the hour?
We're going to be talking about this and talking about one of the key issues facing the Biden-Harris administration is immigration. Who is the immigration czar, the border czar? Kamala Harris. So the question is, has Harris's problem now become Biden's problem? And that's probably one of the reasons we're seeing all of these leaks out of the White House lately about how Kamala Harris is a problem, should be sidelined, on and on.
Well, I think the rift, as we talked with George Will this week, is real. Where there's smoke, there's fire, especially in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah. No one, I don't think, had Kamala Harris as a Supreme Court nominee on their 2021 bingo card, and now people are talking about it.
Right. All right. Leland Vittert, thanks. We'll see you at the top of the hour with On Balance. Plus, why it's important to be prepared no matter how old you are. How a boy saved a four-legged friend and more. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at the Donlon Report on Twitter. Back after this. Other iconic tunes from that show, Dave Frischberg, died yesterday at his home in Portland, Oregon. His wife confirmed that to the New York Times. He was also an accomplished jazz artist, but best remembered for that catchy tune and teaching moment from our childhoods. Dave Frischberg, 88 years old. Similar note now, the mascot from that song is making an appearance on Capitol Hill this week, promoting President Biden's sweeping Build Back Better legislation. And for the record, if there's a mascot story, I'm in. Someone in a cardboard costume made it look like a rolled up piece of paper with a T-shirt saying BBB Bill. It's roaming the halls of Congress. And from the looks of it, when lawmakers trim this package down under $2 million, maybe the mascot budget took a hit too. That is just a little sad. We need to get Bill some new cardboard at least. It looks like maybe he's heading for the recycling bin. All right, you're going to have to put more thought, guys, into your partner's gift this year, at least if you count on Victoria's Secret. Some bad news for you. The lingerie company says nearly 50% of its holiday merchandise is stuck in transit. Victoria's Secret ordered 200 million items for its fourth quarter sales period, but about half of those items are caught up in the supply chain issues and backlogs at U.S. ports. The company's CEO says 100 ships carrying products are anchored at ports, but they haven't come ashore, so they're using air freight now to try to get the products to shore, but that still takes about 9 days. So now Santa Baby may have to come up with something else. Another sign of the times now, CVS planning to close hundreds of its stores. The pharmacy chain says it'll close 300 locations a year for the next 3 years. This comes as CVS restructures to focus more on primary health care. Certain stores are becoming health hubs that focus on clinical services and health products. CVS says employees impacted by the closures will be offered positions elsewhere in the company. Changes are slated to start next year. Finally now, to our American Snapshot tonight, a pair of hikers lost on a Hawaiian trail learned to be prepared from someone who knows that rule well. A 12-year-old Boy Scout used his wilderness skills to help them and their dog out of a jam. David King and his mom were hiking along a trail when they found the couple lost with no water, depleted cell phones, and an injured 100-pound dog. David used his merit badge skills to craft a stretcher for the animal out of T-shirts and tree branches, and the group was able to get the dog and everyone back to safety. The resourceful scout later added to being prepared his only golden rule. Always listen to instructions and what you're learning in class, that's for sure. Man, that deserves another badge, no question. That's going to do it for us. We're out of time. Leland's next with On Balance. Have a great night. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.